$6,000 a month, Miss Torres. That's your new rent, starting next month. Gerald Morrison stood in my doorway like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. But the smile on his face told me this wasn't about market rates. This was personal. Why would a landlord who'd barely acknowledged my existence for 3 years suddenly triple my rent overnight? I set down my coffee mug slowly, studying the man who'd just declared war without knowing he'd already lost. That's a 200% increase, Mr. Morrison. Portland rental laws clearly state, sue me. He interrupted, his thin lips curling into a sneer. Oh wait. You can't. We both know you can't afford a lawyer on a bookkeeper's salary. I'd lived in this apartment for 3 years, never late on rent, never complained about the leaky faucet or the ancient heating system. My one-bedroom in Portland's Hawthorne district had been my sanctuary. The place I came home to after long days building something Gerald Morrison couldn't begin to understand. The exposed brick walls, the bay window overlooking the street, the creaky hardwood floors, I'd made it mine. You're right, I said, meeting his eyes steadily. I can't afford to sue you. So I'll just move. The surprise on his face was almost comical. He'd expected tears, begging. Maybe threats. Smart girl, you have 30 days, and don't even think about fighting this. I've got a corporate tenant lined up willing to pay triple what you're paying now. After he left, I walked to my bay window and looked down at Hawthorne Boulevard. The coffee shop on the corner where I'd spent countless mornings, the vintage bookstore that still smelled like old paper and possibility, the artisan bakery that made sourdough so good it should be illegal. This neighborhood had been my home, my community, my refuge. What Gerald Morrison didn't know, what nobody knew, was that the quiet bookkeeper in apartment 3B had been very, very busy for the past 18 months. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer, Thomas Chen. Got your message. Meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m.? I typed back, make it 10 a.m. And bring the Morrison Street portfolio files. Morrison Street. The irony wasn't lost on me. Let me take you back 18 months to when this whole thing started. I was having lunch at Sal's Deli, my usual Tuesday spot, when I overheard Gerald Morrison bragging to his investor friends at the next table. The trick is finding old buildings with rent-controlled tenants, he said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. You make their lives hell, raise the rent illegally, skip repairs, make it unbearable. They leave, you renovate, and suddenly you're charging tech workers for $1,000 for a studio. His friends laughed. One of them, a man in an expensive suit, raised his glass to gentrification profits. I sat there, my tuna sandwich turning to ash in my mouth. I thought about Mrs. Kowalski, the elderly woman who lived into A for 20 years before suddenly deciding to move last spring, about the young family in 1C who'd left crying, their daughter's drawings still taped to the mailbox. That's when I made a decision. Gerald Morrison thought he was a real estate genius, but he'd made one critical mistake. He assumed everyone else was playing checkers while he played chess. He didn't know I was playing an entirely different game, you see. Bookkeeper was technically accurate. What I didn't advertise was that I was a forensic accountant who'd spent 5 years at a major consulting firm before going independent. My clients included real estate investment trusts, private equity firms, and yes, predatory landlords who needed someone to help them optimize their holdings. I knew every trick, every loophole, every shady practice. I knew how they thought because I'd helped them think that way until I couldn't stomach it anymore. But I'd saved my money. Every penny from those high-paying consulting gigs went into a personal investment fund. No fancy car, no designer clothes, no exotic vacations. Just a growing pile of capital and a plan that was starting to take shape. That night after overhearing Morrison's lunch conversation, I started researching. Morrison Properties owned 12 buildings in the Hawthorne district. But Morrison himself was over-leveraged, drowning in variable rate loans he'd taken out when interest rates were low. The buildings were profitable, but his corporate structure was a house of cards. I started with the building next door, a sweet old Victorian that Morrison had let deteriorate while jacking up rents. The owner was a shell company registered in Delaware, but 3 layers deep, it all traced back to Morrison's main holding company when the building went up for sale quietly. Through a commercial real estate broker, I made an offer through my own LLC. Morrison never knew who bought it. Why would he? It was just another faceless corporate entity in a city full of them. I paid cash, $1.2 million for a building worth easily $1.8 million if properly managed. The seller was motivated. Morrison needed to cover a loan payment and thought he could always buy it back later. Hat was building number 1. Over the next 18 months, I bought for more buildings on the same block. Not all of them were Morrison's. I snapped up anything that came available, building a concentrated portfolio on 3 consecutive blocks in Hawthorne. I used different LLCs, different brokers, different strategies. One building I bought at auction when the previous owner defaulted. Another I purchased from an estate sale. A third from an out-of-state investor who was tired of dealing with Portland's rental market. But 3 of them, including the crown jewel corner property with the coffee shop on the ground floor, those came from Morrison. Each time, he thought he was making a smart move, liquidating assets to cover his growing debt problems. Each time, he was selling to me. My day job as a bookkeeper was perfect cover. I worked from home, kept my expenses low, and nobody questioned the quiet woman in 3B who paid her rent on time and didn't cause trouble. Meanwhile, I was becoming one of the largest small-scale property owners in the neighborhood. The beautiful irony, I was actually a good landlord. I kept rents reasonable, made repairs promptly, and built relationships with my tenants, Mrs. Chen, who ran the alteration shop, the young couple with the new baby, the grad student who could barely afford Portland's skyrocketing costs. They all stayed. They all thrived, and my buildings maintained 98% occupancy. Morrison's buildings, including mine, constant turnover, constant complaints, constant deterioration. The morning after Morrison's rent ultimatum, I called my property manager, Sarah. "How's the Morrison building looking?" "Which one?" she asked. "We own 3 of his former properties now." "No, the one I'm currently living in, the one he still owns." "Oh, that disaster. Why?" "Because in 30 days, I'm going to own it too." Start running the numbers on what it'll take to renovate all 6 units properly. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You're really going to do this, aren't you?" "He tripled my rent to force me out, Sarah. He's doing it to extract every penny before flipping the building. I've watched him destroy this neighborhood one family at a time." I paused. "Yeah, I'm really going to do this." The next day, my lawyer Thomas confirmed what I suspected. Morrison Properties was in serious financial trouble. 3 buildings in foreclosure, Tamor headed that way, and the building I lived in was mortgaged to the hilt. He'd been using rental income to cover interest payments, but his variable rates had tripled in the past year. "He's desperate," Thomas said. "That's why he's squeezing tenants. He needs cash flow immediately or the whole empire collapses. What if someone bought the mortgage?" Thomas raised an eyebrow. "The bank would probably love to offload it. Morrison's been late on payments twice this quarter. But we're talking $3.2 million. Make the call, Sophia. That's a huge risk." "Thomas, I've been preparing for this for 18 months. I've modeled every scenario. The building is worth $4.5 million minimum if properly managed." Morrison's just a terrible operator who's over-leveraged. Make the call 2 weeks later. I owned the mortgage on my own building. Morrison had no idea the bank simply transferred the note to my LLC, and as long as he made his payments to the new servicer, why would he look into it? But here's the thing about predatory landlords, they're usually terrible at actual business. Morrison was so focused on squeezing tenants that he'd ignored the fundamentals. He'd deferred maintenance, skipped insurance payments, and worst of all, he'd been illegally increasing rents beyond Portland's rental control limits. I had documentation of everything. Every illegal increase, every ignored repair request. Every building code violation, 18 months of careful, methodical evidence gathering. The day before my 30-day notice was up, Morrison showed up at my door again, this time with a lease termination notice and an eviction warning. Just making sure you got the message. Miss Torres, tomorrow's your last day. I've got contractors starting demolition next week. I smiled. Demolition. Don't you mean renovation? Same difference. This whole floor is becoming a luxury to bedroom. Tech workers are willing to pay $7,500 a month. He looked around my apartment with disdain. This place is wasted on people like you. People like me? You know what I mean. People without ambition. Without money. This neighborhood is changing, sweetheart. Evolve or get out. That's when I decided to end it, mister. Morrison, I have a question. Do you know who owns the mortgage on this building? He blinked. What? The bank. First National. Why? Actually, First National sold your mortgage 2 weeks ago. The new note holder is Hawthorne Holdings LLC. So what? I make my payments to whoever owns the note, right? Except you missed last month's payment. And the month before that. Which means, according to the terms of your mortgage agreement, the note holder can call the loan immediately due. His face went pale. I made those payments. No, you didn't. I have the records. And even if you had, there's the matter of the $47,000 in building code violations. The illegal rent increases. And the pattern of tenant harassment that violates Portland's rental laws. You can't prove any of that. I pulled out my phone and opened a folder. Actually, I have documentation going back 3 years, including recorded conversations where you explicitly describe your strategy of making tenants' lives hell to force them out. Morrison's confidence was cracking. Who the hell are you? Someone who got very tired of watching you destroy people's lives for profit. I walk to my window, see that building across the street. I own it, the one next door, mine, the corner property with the coffee shop, also mine, in fact. I own 5 of the 6 buildings on this block. Bullshit. Hawthorne Holdings. Morrison Street Investments, Belmont Properties LLC, all mine, Mr. Morrison. You've been selling to me for 18 months, piece by piece, liquidating your empire to cover your debts, and now I own the mortgage on your last building. The color drained from his face completely. This is insane. You're a bookkeeper, you can't. Possibly forensic accountant. Actually specialized in real estate investment analysis. Those consulting gigs paid very well. I smiled. And I've been a very frugal person. My lawyer, Thomas, chose that moment to knock on my door. Perfect timing. I let him in, and he handed Morrison a thick envelope. Mr. Morrison, I'm here in my capacity as legal counsel for Hawthorne Holdings LLC. This is a notice of loan acceleration. The full amount of $3.2 million is due in 30 days. Additionally, we're filing complaints with the city regarding multiple building code violations and illegal rental practices. Finally, he handed over a second envelope. This is an eviction notice. The new owner of this building is terminating your management agreement and taking direct control of the property. Morrison stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. You can't do this, actually. I can, I said. Everything I'm doing is completely legal, unlike the things you've been doing for. Yes, I'll fight this. I'll sue. You'll lose, Thomas interrupted. We have 3 years of documentation. Every illegal rent increase, every ignored repair request, every code violation. Portland's tenant protection laws are very clear. You're looking at potentially hundreds of thousands in fines. Plus damages to every tenant you've illegally displaced. Morrison's hands were shaking now. The bully had finally met someone who couldn't be bullied. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I considered the question. What did I want? Revenge? Justice? Both felt too simple. I want you out of this neighborhood, I said finally. I want you to sign over full ownership of this building in lieu of the mortgage payment. I want you to agree never to operate rental properties in Portland again, and I want a public apology to every tenant you've displaced. That's everything. You're taking everything. No. Mr. Morrison, I'm taking what you stole. There's a difference. He looked at Thomas, who nodded. My client is being generous. The alternative is foreclosure, lawsuits, and possible criminal charges for fraud and tenant harassment. This way, you walk away without a criminal record. Morrison signed the papers that afternoon. The building became mine, free and clear. Over the next month, I had a team of contractors do the work. Morrison had always been too cheap to do new heating system, fixed plumbing, updated electrical, proper insulation. The works. Then I reached out to every tenant he'd displaced over the past 3 years. Mrs. Kowalski, the elderly woman who'd moved to Vancouver to afford rent. The young family with the little girl who drew pictures. The grad student who'd had to move back in with his parents. I'm offering you your old apartments back, I told each of them, at the rent you were paying before Morrison forced you out. Adjusted only for legal cost of living increases, Mrs. Kowalski cried on the phone. The young family drove down from Seattle that same day to see their old apartment. The grad student asked me 3 times if I was serious. Within 2 months, the building was fully occupied, not with tech workers paying $7,500 a month, but with the community members who'd been there all along, teachers, artists, small business owners, retirees, the people who made Hawthorne District a real neighborhood instead of just another gentrified playground. My portfolio now includes 8 buildings in the district. I'm not a slumlord and I'm not getting rich. My properties generate modest but steady returns. I pay my contractors fairly, respond to maintenance requests within 24 hours, and keep rent increases reasonable. Last month, I saw Gerald Morrison at a city council meeting about rental regulations. He was there to oppose stronger tenant protections. Naturally, when he saw me sitting in the front row, he went pale and left before the vote. I didn't gloat. I didn't even acknowledge him. Because this was never about him. Not really. It was about proving that you can make money in real estate without destroying people's lives. That's sustainable. Ethical property management isn't just possible, it's more profitable in the long run. My neighbors know me now, not as the quiet bookkeeper in 3B, but as Sophia Torres, the landlord who actually gives a damn. Mrs. Chen brings me homemade dumplings. The couple with the baby asks me to be their daughter's godmother. The grad student, who's now finishing his dissertation, thanks me every time he sees me. This morning, I got a call from another small landlord in the Alberta district. She is retiring and wants to sell her 4-unit building to someone who'll take care of her tenants. We're meeting next week. The empire Gerald Morrison tried to build through cruelty and greed is gone. In its place is something better, a community where people can afford to live, where landlords view tenants as neighbours instead of revenue streams. Where housing is a home rather than just an investment vehicle. I still live in my one-bedroom apartment with the bay window and creaky floors. I could afford something bigger now, something fancier, but why would I leave? This is my home, these are my people, and every morning, when I look out that bay window at the neighborhood Gerald Morrison tried to destroy, I smile. Because some battles aren't won with lawyers and lawsuits, they're won with patience, planning, and the quiet determination to build something better than what came before. Morrison wanted to force me out instead. I forced him to see what real success looks like. It looks like a neighborhood thriving. It looks like families staying in their homes. It looks like a bookkeeper who knew exactly what she was doing all along.